I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Abbas Hamideh, who is the National Chair of Al-Awada, the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition. Abbas is a descendant of the Deir Yassin survivor. His grandfather managed to escape one of the most devastating and bloodiest massacres in 1948 Palestine. He is also the executive director of the Global Campaign for Palestinian Prisoners. And without further ado, I call forward Mr. Abbas Hamideh. Please welcome him.
Hello, good evening. I think you won't have a problem hearing my voice. Some of you may know me from the rallies in Cleveland, the protests in Beachwood that happened during the Gaza massacre recently. That's me, so in case you didn't notice. I have a speech here on Deir Yassin, and I'm going to try to coordinate some of the pictures here with my talk on Deir Yassin. I'm going to spare you the gory footage, the gory photographs, or the gruesome photographs of the massacre at Deir Yassin, but if you need to see any of those photographs, you can simply Google Deir Yassin Massacre. You'll have all the photos you need from other massacres as well. But I do have some photographs here that I'll be going through during my talk and after as well, that I've personalized for you today at the request of Jeff and some others. So we're going to try to make this talk as personable as possible for you. Okay, so we don't get that overreach. Hello everyone again. It is quite an honor and joy to be here as a representative of Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, an organization fully dedicated to the Palestinian refugee right of return to their ancestral homeland, Palestine. Special thanks to the energetic organizers for having me here today, and everyone else involved putting this event together, and also special thanks to you, the attendees, for being here together. Also special thanks to the Cleveland Peace Action. Thank you for having this. I understand it's not easy to have an event like this. And it is always, I believe, delightful to have genuine Palestinian speakers, not always, for some reason, us Palestinians always have other people speaking for us. So this is an important step. If you look across the world, even at, I'm not sure the Geneva Conventions, but when they have Taba talks and Arafat wasn't allowed to attend and that person wasn't allowed to attend. So it is important to hear the Palestinian narrative. Even if you disagree with it, it is very important to hear us because we are the Palestinians. And I'm sure you can agree that anyone of any ethnicity should represent themselves. The love of Palestine and enormous support is evident throughout the world. There's a deep connection between the Palestinians and all people, all justice and seekers of truth. Some of you are here for support, and some do not consider this work as simply solidarity measure, but consider it as your cause and your duty, while some here are simply to learn and seek the truth, or simply to hear the other side of the story. Please know that the Palestinians are grateful for this. We appreciate every opportunity of engagement and every opportunity of sharing our passion for Palestine with you. Ladies and gentlemen, Palestine is part and parcel of the Arab world, therefore, in fact, an Arab cause that is clearly reflected on our national flag. Our Palestinian flag represents not only Arab nationalism, but has become the symbol or revolution global-wide, and we take pride in that. Palestine was always Arab and will remain proudly Arab no matter what others call it for us. It will always be rightfully Palestine and irrefutably the land of our ancestors for centuries. For us, it was Palestine and would continue to be Palestine. Let's see if this works. All right. Palestine, a land with a people. Imagine that. Dr. Nahida explained that earlier as well. The Palestinian Nakba, also known as the Palestinian catastrophe, was well orchestrated long before it occurred in 1948, which caused the dispossession and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from their beloved ancestral villages in order to make way for a so-called Jewish homeland. The story often fantasized by Zionists is that Palestine was a land without a people, for a people without a land. The fantasy does not explain the theft, massacres, mass forced expulsions, the original inhabitants of the land, the Palestinians, who were unquestionably the indigenous people of the land. One well-known example that ignited the Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe, was the village of Deir Yassin, in which I am a direct descendant of. My father and grandparents were survivors of that massacre at Deir Yassin that occurred on April 9, 1948. My father, Fakhri Muhammad Qasim Hamideh, was a survivor of that massacre at Deir Yassin on April 9, 1948. Like most Palestinian refugees, his greatest wish since his forced expulsion in 1948 was to one day be able to return to his village in Palestine. Unfortunately, 53 years later, on February 7, 2001, while driving himself to his regular doctor visit, he passed away at an Israeli checkpoint near Ramallah. My father was receiving kidney dialysis treatment on a regular basis at the Ramallah hospital. Due to the delay at the Israeli checkpoint that day, he could not get through in time. He went into cardiac arrest, passed away inside his vehicle bearing New York license plates. Despite all efforts trying to get through the checkpoint, there were witnesses who explained this to the family, including the Palestinian ambulance medics and hospital officials in Ramallah. The family flew to Palestine the next day for the burial procedures and met with the hospital administration. My dad was laid to rest in Ramallah, away from his village of Deir Yassin, which lies occupied to foreigners of the land till this very day. His dream was to return, and the return was now passed on to his children, the descendants of his beloved village, Deir Yassin. For centuries, the village of Deir Yassin, 3 miles west of Jerusalem, was a peaceful place in Palestine. The word Deir means monastery. In the early 18th century, around 1742, a nomadic Arab Bedouin and his family settled in this village. His name was Sheikh Muhammad al-Yassin. The village was named after Sheikh Muhammad al-Yassin and ever since known as Deir Yassin, the place of Yassin, or the monastery of Yassin. The massacre at Deir Yassin, April 9, 1948. In 1948, Zionist preparations for the massacre at Deir Yassin had begun. The terrorist Zionist Stern Gang put forward a proposal to massacre the residents of the village in order to show that Arabs, what happens when the Irgun and Stern Gangs unite in their operations. One of the aims of the attack was to break Arab morale and create panic throughout Palestine. Taking Deir Yassin was also militarily strategic to Zionist plans to empty Palestine of its indigenous inhabitants. In the early morning of April 9, 1948, the peaceful village of Deir Yassin was attacked and its inhabitants massacred by the terrorist Zionist Irgun Stern Gangs led by Menachem Begin and Ben-Gurion Cohen, respectively. Now, you guys know Menachem Begin later became the prime minister. That is something that a lot of people know. And if you don't, you should. The Irgun and Stern Gangs butchered everyone in their way, men, women, and some were pregnant, and children, to empty the entire village. The massacre was designed to terrify Arabs beyond the village of Deir Yassin so that they would run away, to terrify Arabs across the region and thus be driven out of their homes. This explains why the Zionist death squads did not bury them, women and children that they killed. They left the dead bodies to be seen and frighten other Palestinian Arabs. Those who were still alive were taken by the Zionist terrorist gangs and loaded into trucks with their hands tied and eyes blindfolded. They were paraded through the streets of Jerusalem while other Zionists applauded and celebrated the dehumanization of the Palestinian Arabs. After our people's humiliation through the streets of Jerusalem, they were taken back to Deir Yassin and lined up against the wall and systematically sprayed with gunfire and killed. 53 orphan children were literally dumped along the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, where they were found by Hind al-Hussein. She took them to her home, which is located behind the current American Colony Hotel, and they became the first class of Dar al-Tifl al-Arabi orphanage. A few weeks later, Israel declared itself a state and was recognized almost immediately as such by American President Harry Truman, as Dr. Nahida previously mentioned. With the exception of a few of the graves of the martyrs at Deir Yassin, they will never be known because they were bulldozed by the state of Israel, apparently to make way for the new Jewish settlers. The terrorist criminals who perpetrated the Deir Yassin massacre were never punished and were never brought to justice. Instead, they were rewarded, and one former leader of the Irgun, Menachem Begin, became prime minister soon after, like I mentioned earlier. Later, the renowned war criminal Ariel Sharon continued to carry out the slow genocide set in motion by the European U.S. Zionist project against Arab countries that continues till this very day. Morton A. Klein of the Zionist Organization of America published a report entitled Deir Yassin, History of a Lie, that claims that there was no massacre at Deir Yassin. To deny Deir Yassin is like denying the Nazi Judeocide in Europe during World War II. The massacre at Deir Yassin is true as the Nazi Holocaust in Europe. The village of Deir Yassin was only one of many massacres perpetrated by the Zionists and Israelis to terrorize the indigenous people of Palestine. Other Palestinian villages were massacred and occurred, which include Ain Karim, which neighbors Deir Yassin, Qaqoon, Tantura, Jaffa, Safad, Sufsaf. And in Sufsaf, 115 people were massacred at the wall of the Sufsaf Mosque. Haifa, Tirat Haifa, Jibzu, and many more. The Sufsaf residents witnessed their second massacre in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camp 34 years later in 1982. The war criminal Ariel Sharon was directly responsible for that massacre. Contrary to Zionist myth that the old will die and the young will forget, 67 years later, some of our elders may have died, but the young still remember. The descendants of Deir Yassin, the Palestinian refugees, and people on the ground at home and elsewhere continue to struggle for the time when we can claim our absolute, sacred, individual, and collective right of return to our original homes and lands. UN Resolution 194 affirmed that the right of Palestinians to return their homes and lands is a resolution that was further clarified by the UN General Assembly Resolution 3236, which reaffirmed in subsection 2 the inalienable right of Palestinians to return to their homes and property, which they have been displaced and uprooted, and calls for their return. The Palestinian right of return is specifically to their original homes and lands, and not simply to what may be designated as a Palestinian state in the future. Working towards the right of return of Palestinian refugees, Palestinians around the world, like us here today, are not just commemorating the 67th Nakba of the Palestinian people, but are also simultaneously celebrating 67 years of resistance and perseverance. Our mission is not just to commemorate and remember what happened to our people during the Palestinian catastrophe, but to work towards rightfully returning home to Palestine. We remember, but we still fight and endure towards our inalienable right to return. We, the Palestinian people, do not wish to be symbolically recognized, but we wish to return, and without the right of return, the Palestinian refugees to their homes, there will never be a just solution. In order for peace to come about, justice must be served. These are pictures here. I'm pretty much done with the context and brief history on Deir Yassin massacre. I have set up some pictures here. These are Palestinian refugees who were fleeing in 1948 during the Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe. Some were walking, some were just got their belongings and took whatever they can and basically fled the area. Some were loaded onto trucks like this, or tried to get on a truck so they're not left behind and killed. After the Deir Yassin massacre, people started telling each other what happened there. It was scary. And that was the purpose, like what I was mentioning earlier in my talk. The purpose of the Deir Yassin Massacre was to let others flee, was people in Haifa and Jaffa to be scared and to run away. So unlike some Zionist claims where they say that they willfully left and they just abandoned homes, that was a lie. People were terrified. If we heard people dying down the hallway, we would want to run at the exit doors as well. This is a Palestinian woman, and why I put this picture up here is because of the Palestinian identity. Each Palestinian thawb or Palestinian cultural dress, if you look at the threadings, if you look how it's decorated, it links the person directly to the land. So this woman has a Ramallah dress. From the embroidery, you can tell that it is from not only Palestine, where people deny that Arafat basically created this Palestinian state, to say that, it was a lie, Palestine never existed. Ladies and gentlemen, the Palestinians have their embroidery, have their cultural dresses to prove not only that they're from Palestine, but an area. And I challenge you to let any Zionist European say that they can do something similar like that their clothing can be traced to the land without using God, without using delusions, facts. These are facts on the ground. This is a photograph from 1967. By the way, my family not only survived the massacre of Deir Yassin in 1948, but we have something that we call Al-Nakba, besides Al-Nakba, which basically was the second phase of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So my family, while they were refugees after they were forced from their village of Deir Yassin, after some were massacred, those who survived, in my particular stance, or my family, they went to a Jericho refugee camp. And in 1967, they were forcefully expelled like this man, again, the second time. This was the second phase of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So like this man here, they had their bags and were forced across the Alembi Bridge, or what they call the King Hussein Bridge. This is my father. These are some of the pictures of the survivors of my family. Handsome man, huh? That's how a lot of Arabs had their mustaches across the Levant, not only in Palestine, so in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, many men grew their mustaches like this. So this was something common. And he kept it. This was his last studio photograph. They didn't have selfies at the time, but his last studio photograph before he passed away at the checkpoint was this photo right here. These are my aunties to the far left. That's not the Godfather, by the way. That's Aisha. It's not from a Godfather movie, although she does look like the Godfather. She's a tough woman. I tried to extract testimony from her on Deir Yassin, and she wouldn't give it to me. She said, "Are you going to give it to the Israelis, to the Mossad? I don't want to speak." People, she lives in Jordan. People are actually afraid till this very day to speak. She was afraid to talk about Deir Yassin. The ones on the right were her sisters. They're also my aunties, Naama and Zarifa. And again, you can see on the far right, the cultural dress, which identifies where you're from. That's my dad. That is my dad's picture on the top right as well. And on the lower right, well, he was a refugee. So we were refugees in style. He was wearing a suit. That was actually his jewelry shop. He was a jeweler while being a refugee. So he lived in refugee camps. We had tents and so on and so forth. And later adopted into society. And they worked. And by the way, my father was not in Palestine in 1967. He had left 6 months prior. So my mom and 7 children were actually forcefully expelled from Jericho to Amman by foot. They walked from Jericho to Amman. My dad wasn't there. They were kissing him before he left. That was the top right photo that he took. All right. Far left, that was my oldest aunt, Sham'a, which basically means candle or light. Far right was Fatima. I'm sure you've heard of Fatima. All right. And the one in the middle was my only paternal uncle, who passed away not from chaos in Palestine, but he was a miner. He passed away in a village called Silwan. A rock fragment basically went right through his skull. I never met him, okay, but I named one of my sons after him. He was an Arab nationalist. He was also one of the survivors at the massacre. Far left are my grandparents, Muhammad and Khadija. Okay, and that's my father. On the right side, if you look to the far left, another time wearing a suit in 1958, he was chilling in Kuwait at the time. And this is the 7 that walked across that bridge that you saw the man. These 7 right here, my oldest sister Samira, I'm not going to name all of them because we don't have much time and Jeff is flashing his victory signs. So that's my oldest brother Ali, and the youngest there is Ahmad. I'll just say that. This was a photograph soon after they reached Amman. They took a photograph and sent it to my father. It took about a month, I guess, till you get mail around that time. He was in South America and eventually made his way to Puerto Rico, found himself a nice Puerto Rican woman, all right, and got his papers. Hey, I'm just being honest. That's how they did it back then. And they can't go after him. He's dead. But far left, grandparents again with the children. They met up in Amman afterwards. And this is soon after they reached Amman. The picture on the right, that's my mom and the children. Those children were with her while they were forcefully expelled. Imagine walking from Jericho to Amman. I don't know how many miles that is. Maybe you can research it. But Jericho to Amman. This is a picture of Samir al-Isawi. The reason why I put it up here is because they made mention that I affiliated with the Palestinian Political Prisoners campaign. And he was a very famous hero in Palestine that went on to hunger strike for over 277 days. And when you say that, you say that's impossible, you're crazy, nobody survives that long. It's true, it's a partial hunger strike. It's not a full hunger strike where you don't have drink water or anything. They drink water, they infuse vitamins in them, and that's how they basically do it. They released him after this heroic campaign. Many of you may not heard it, but he holds the world record in hunger strike with assistance, of course, like I said, with some of the nutrients. He's been rearrested, him and his sister. They're currently in jail, but these are one of my personal heroes. That's his mom there, and that's his dad. And we don't have enough time to talk about everything, obviously, but they have been engaged in the struggle since the 60s. And that is one family that has a hell of a ride in Palestine till this very day. This is the map, what Nahida was talking about earlier, Dr. Nahida, basically shows you, you hear these things that the Arabs or the Muslims or the Palestinians want to throw the Jews in the sea. That's absolute BS, and I'm being nice here because it's the other way around, as Dr. Nahida mentioned. Our stories are very similar, by the way. When you speak to Palestinians, we're not far off because there's only one truth. And that's what happened to Palestine from 46, from the mandate, and I guess the latest 2007. I don't know if there's anything else been taken in 2015. I'm going to hurry up. Don't worry. Almost done. And I hope you agree that one Holocaust doesn't justify another. Does that make sense? All right.